What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was kidnapped by a secret clan? And their princess wants to marry him. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. You sure we're going the right way, Uruki? Asked a young shinobi clad in a black cloak etched with red clouds. The man wore the traditional hite-8 of Kumo around his forehead with a line scratched through, indicating that he was a rouge ninja. Uruki also wore the same attire, with the only exception being a scratched-out hite-8 from Kiri instead of Kumo. Uruki nodded in reply. Yes, Nori, the spot should be just ahead where we left Yuri to keep watch for any signs of those damned Konoha shinobi. He never gave the signal to abort the mission, so he should be able to bring back a through report on the Kyuubi's location. The two men soon reached their destination but were confused upon not seeing their comrade anywhere. This is where we left him, right? Uruki looked around in confusion. Yeah, this is the spot he should be. The man stopped when he felt something wet fall onto his head. Uruki carefully brought his fingertips to the top of his scalp and widened his eyes when he looked at the dark liquid staining his fingers. Blood, but how? He then noticed his comrade visibly shaking while staring up in horror into the canopy of trees above them. Uruki followed the young man's gaze to where the body of Yuri was gruesomely impaled through several thick branches, his blood dripping down onto them like drops of dew. Uruki nearly vomited at the sight. We need to retreat, he shouted, but before he could take another step, a kunai zipped through the air from above and went straight through his throat. Blood from his jugular splattered onto Nori's face, who then took off in the opposite direction. How did he find us so quickly? The young rogue ninja thought with affright. He then tripped and fell. He immediately reached for one of his kunai when he sat up, ready to defend himself from the invisible attacker. The young man's breathing started to slow as he realized that he had escaped from the enemy. He sighed and brought his weapon down. The Rouge Nin then noticed movement in the reflection of his kunai, so he turned it around to get a better look. He froze upon seeing dozens of red, slitted eyes reflected in the trees above him. Nori slowly turned his face upwards, only to be met with the sight of several shinobi grinning down at him from the tree branches. All of the shinobi were clones of a certain blonde-haired Jinchuriki that the Rouge Ninja and his comrades were supposed to be gathering intelligence on. However, they were given strict orders to not engage the Jinchuriki, because it meant certain death. The man remained frozen in terror as he watched one of the clones jump down to land just in front of him. The Jinchuriki knelt down, eyeing the dark robes the terrified young man was wearing. "Akatsuki, huh?" the clone remarked in a deep, scratchy voice. The Jinchuriki then grabbed Nori forcefully around the neck and lifted him off the ground while grinning in amusement. "When will you bastards ever learn?" He drew his arm back with his sharp fingertips pointed at the young man's chest. "You will never catch me." The young man's screams filled the forest, as the Jinchuriki ripped his heart out while the remaining clones in the branches laughed maniacally. To say that Hinata Hyuga was lovely would be an understatement. The 17-year-old possessed a warm smile and kind, lavender pearlescent eyes. She had waist-length indigo hair that gracefully fell over her shoulders and back, while perfectly framing her gentle face. Her ivory skin was soft to the touch and free of blemish. She was blessed with a thin figure and an ample chest, which was hidden elegantly under the layers of her kimono. As heiress to the Hyuga clan, Hinata was well educated. She could read and write at an advanced level and was also very well versed on the current politics going on throughout the Land of Fire. She could easily carry an intelligent conversation on various topics ranging from the decisive battles of the late Second Shinobi War to the trading policies of Kusagakure. In her clan's eyes, however, her biggest fault was that she was born a woman. While the surrounding clans and hidden villages had allowed their women to become shinobi over the past decade, the Hyuga have held fast to their ancient traditional view of a woman's place in society. To the Hyuga, women were primarily mothers and homemakers. They did not become shinobi, that was men's work. As far as the elders were concerned, Hinata's main purpose in life was to marry well and produce a male heir that will lead the clan someday. Her father Hiyashi had slightly different views though. He never challenged the idea of not allowing the women in the clan to become shinobi, yet he wanted his daughters to know how to protect themselves should an attack ever come upon the Hyuga compound. So, he taught Hinata and her younger sister, Hanabi, the taijutsu style of the gentle fist. Hinata did not have much occasion to use her shinobi skills, so it was fair to say that she was not one of the strongest gentle fist users in her clan, but she could still defend herself should the occasion ever present itself. Unfortunately, Hinata's gender was not her only fault as seen through the eyes of the clan elders. Hinata had a meek and overly kind personality. She was soft-spoken and had trouble maintaining eye contact while talking with someone. She hardly ever asked the servants to do anything for her, and when she did, it was more of a polite request rather than an order from one of the highest-ranked members of the clan. Hinata mostly did things for herself. She cooked, cleaned up after herself, and did most of her own chores. The elders saw Hinata as a weak-willed woman that acted beneath her station. This harsh criticism caused Hinata to grow up under an unrealistic pressure to be a perfect heiress, doing whatever was necessary for the benefit of her clan. However, it seemed that no matter what Hinata did, she was always a disappointment to the elders and the other members of the main household. Speaking her mind and expressing her feelings were always looked down upon, so Hinata has learned to keep her emotions hidden from those around her. With the exception of her immediate family and her trusted lady-in-waiting, Hotaru. This endless strive for perfection caused Hinata to never be satisfied with the person looking back at her in the mirror. There was always something she was lacking in. She could be more feminine, she could be more confident, she could be more intelligent, she always had to be more. Tonight, Hinata was on her way to her father's office. She shuffled quietly through the halls wondering what her father was summoning her for. Though he was a strict man, Hinata had a good relationship with her father and loved him dearly. Hiyashi Hyuga was often stern and stoic in his role as clan leader, but when it was just him and his daughters, he was warm and approachable. He had stuck up for Hinata many times when the elders put pressure on him to disinherit Hinata and name her sister, Hanabi, as heiress instead. That was, until recent events transpired. Hinata pushed back those awful memories as she approached her father's office. A few months ago, she had suffered the biggest humiliation of her life. One that even left her own father disappointed in her. Things had been strained between the two since then, so Hinata was surprised when her father asked for her presence this evening. She had hoped that he was entrusting her again to resume her heiress training, which included accompanying him to his meetings and listening to him as he briefed her on world events. Hinata had missed that time with her father over the past few months. When she reached the shoji door leading into her father's office, she stopped and bowed. "Father, I am here as you requested," she announced timidly. There was a brief pause before she heard, "You may enter." Hinata straightened up and carefully slid the door open and stepped through. She immediately closed the door back behind her and knelt before her father. "You wanted to see me, father?" "You can sit up, Hinata," her father ordered. Hinata complied as she nervously awaited to find out the reason for her father calling her here tonight. "As you know, the Yondaime and I have been working on an alliance between our clan and Konoha for several years." Hinata nodded her head in understanding as Hiyashi continued. "I'm happy to say that we have finally reached an arrangement to have the Hyuga clan join forces with Konoha. The alliance was drafted just this morning." Hinata's heart beamed with joy and she smiled at her father's news. Hiyashi and the Yondaime, Minato Namikaze, had been friends for many years. Back in the days of the Second Shinobi War, the Hyuga sent their strongest shinobi to assist Konoha's forces in the battle against Iwa. Hiyashi himself was one of those shinobi. It was then that he had met and fought alongside Minato. By the time the war was over, the two men had forged a strong respect for the other, which was the basis of their friendship. One of Hiyashi's ambitions had been to bring the Hyuga clan into an alliance with Konoha and become part of the village. Presently, the Hyuga clan were independent of any village affiliation. They had been peaceful neighbors with Konoha ever since the village was founded several decades ago, but the elders and the clan leaders before Hiyashi had been vehemently against joining the village despite several invitations during those early years. They argued that the mighty Hyuga clan had no need to affiliate itself with any village and that it put their Kekkei Genkei, the Byakugan, at risk of being stolen by outsiders. Hiyashi disagreed. Between the constant warfare amongst the hidden villages and the recent threat of Rouge Ninja banding together, Hiyashi believed that it would only be a matter of time before the Hyuga became the target of an enemy that would be too powerful for them to stop. By joining forces with Konoha, They would have the protection of their shinobi forces, which was made up of several members of powerful clans. They would also have access to Konoha's vast intelligence on enemy forces. In recent years, Hiyashi realized that his clan did not have the resources they needed to keep up with protecting themselves from the unstable shinobi world growing around them. For Hinata, this also meant that better resources would become available to the branch members of the clan. The Hyuga clan had a brutal system in which the branch members were placed in servitude to the main house. To protect the Byakugan and maintain control, each branch family member had the caged bird seal placed on them when they turned 3. Every male member of the main house knew the secret jutsu to activate the seal, which could literally liquefy the brain of any branch member in the event they threatened to step out of line. While members of the main house lived in the lavish Hyuga mansion at the center of the compound, the branch members were forced to live on the outskirts of the property in decrepit shacks and barely enough food to survive on. Becoming part of Konoha would mean that they would have access to more plentiful supplies and opportunities to work within the village for better pay. Maybe, the Hyuga women would even finally be allowed to become shinobi. Joining forces with Konoha could only bring good for the Hyuga clan, and Hinata was ecstatic that such an achievement was finally in sight. How did the elders react? Hinata asked softly. Actually, Hiyashi stated, they don't know. Hinata's eyes widened at the revelation. Though her father was clan leader, when it came to such an important decision as this, the majority of the elders would need to support Hiyashi to make the alliance work. This isn't public knowledge yet, Hiyashi continued. Only myself, the Hokage, and now you, know about the arrangement. Hinata was happy at this revelation, as it meant that her father was trusting her again with such important clan matters. Father, I'm glad to hear that our clan will finally join forces with Konoha, she exclaimed, but what about the elders? Are you certain that they would support it? A somber look came over her father. That's where you come in, Hinata. The young woman sat there in nervous anticipation at what her father had planned and what her role was to be. Traditionally, alliances such as these are sealed through an arranged marriage between one member from both sides. By bringing two families together, it strengthens the new bond and ensures that the alliance will last through the future generations the marriage will produce. Hinata felt every muscle in her body stiffen and a weight settled in her stomach. Why, you mean? Hiyashi closed his eyes. Hinata, as my eldest daughter, you have a duty to always do right by the clan. This includes having to make sacrifices that lower-class members of our clan will never have to face. One of these sacrifices is to marry for duty rather than love. Hiyashi opened his eyes again, looking resolvedly at his eldest. In order to seal this important alliance with Konoha and to gain the support of the elders, it is suggested that you should be married to one of the most powerful shinobi soldiers that Konoha has ever produced. The children you would have with this man would not only represent the future of our alliance with Konoha, but they would also bring honor and power to our clan. Hinata averted her gaze to the floor beneath her as she clasped her hands around the fabric of her kimono. So this shinobi, he is from a different clan? She asked meekly. Hiyashi turned away. Yes. A tense silence fell into the room as the implication of what this meant settled in. As heiress, Hinata had to marry within the clan in order to become clan leader after her father died. To marry outside the clan meant that she would never be allowed to lead it. By arranging a marriage to a man in a different clan, Hiyashi was effectively disinheriting Hinata. The earlier hope the young woman had carried with her fell through the cracks and was replaced with an overwhelming feeling of defeat. It was official, her father no longer wanted her as heiress. The elders had their way in the end. Hiyashi looked across at his daughter once again. Believe me, Hinata, in light of recent events, this will be the best prospect you'll have. He slid a piece of paper over to her. And I suggest you do everything to ensure that this man will choose to have you, he told her sternly. Hinata only lowered her gaze even more, trying to push away the shame from the events her father was referring to. She unfolded the paper and her eyes widened as she read the name of the man she was to be married to. Hiyashi continued, that paper contains everything you need to know about his shinobi career. I suggest you study it well tonight. He and the Hokage will be here tomorrow evening to join us for dinner. Hinata said nothing back. Her only reaction was a tighter grip on the piece of paper sitting between her fingertips. You are dismissed, her father finished sternly. Hinata stiffly folded the paper back up and bowed once again to her father. Without looking back at him, she swiftly stood up and quietly exited the room. When she was several meters away from her father's office, Hinata broke out into a run down the narrow passages of the Hyuga mansion, not stopping until she reached the room she shared with her sister. Upon entering the room, she was relieved to see her sister not there. She slid her bedroom door shut and then collapsed onto the floor, letting her sobs of anger, distraught, and frustration finally come out. She was still clutching the paper containing information about the man she was proposed to be bound to for the rest of her life. In between her sobs, she stared hard at that cursed piece of paper and threw it aside. Hinata was not a shinobi, but she was very familiar with the legendary ninja to come out of Konoha. There of course was the Hokage himself, Minato Namikaze, the most powerful shinobi of his generation. There was also Kakashi Hitaki, the copy ninja who was reported to know over 1,000 jutsu. Lady Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, was the greatest medical nin in the Land of Fire. But there were also those shinobi who carried a much darker reputation. This included Orochimaru, the Rouge Konoha ninja whose twisted human experiments rivaled the most horrific images to come out of one's nightmares. There was the famed Madara Uchiha, who single-handedly came close to taking over the village and ruling it as a dictatorship. And there was also the Hokage's son, Naruto Namikaze, the Jinchuriki of the feared Kyuubi who attacked the village 18 years ago. The young shinobi was rumored to have viscously slaughtered over 100 of his enemies within the past year with his own bare hands. This had earned him the nickname, the Demon of Konoha, a warrior who was possessed the vengeful demon spirit that took over in the heat of battle. And he was the shinobi whose name was written on that fateful piece of paper laying on Hinata's bedroom floor. Naruto Namikaze walked eagerly through the shinobi camp that had been his post for the past 3 months. The camp was near the border of the Land of Fire and Takigakure, and its purpose was to defend the border from members of the Akatsuki. The Akatsuki were a group of rogue ninja, whose membership had grown at a disturbing rate over the past year. No one had been able to figure out their true motives, but it was clear what their mission was: to capture Jinchuriki. 3 out of the 9 Jinchuriki had already gone missing, which was creating a panic amongst the hidden villages who feared the idea of all 9 of the tailed beasts being possessed by one singular group. The Akatsuki's activities in recent months had been hard to follow and intelligence was scarce, so Naruto had been given a 6-month assignment in an effort to lure out certain members of the Akatsuki. It was a risky mission to himself, who was also a Jinchuriki, but Naruto was one of the top jonin of Konoha and proved many times that he was more than capable of protecting himself. When he started at the Ninja Academy, Naruto was a joke to his classmates. He was always dead last when it came to test scores and academics, and his jutsu skills back then were pitiful. It took Naruto 3 tries before he finally passed the graduation exam to become a genin. Since then, through determination, guts, and the support of his father and Iruka-sensei, Naruto slowly became stronger. Today in particular was a special day for Naruto. It was the day that he was finally going to tell Sakura Haruno that he loved her. Sakura was one of the girls from his class at the academy and was on the same team as him once they became genin. She despised the annoying blonde ninja at first, but with time the two had formed a close bond and friendship. Especially since their third teammate, Sasuke Uchiha, defected from the village along with the rest of the Uchiha clan 1 year ago. The Uchiha defection had been a devastating blow to Konoha's shinobi forces and morale. As one of the original clans of Konoha, they had always been a key pillar in the village structure and their loyalty to the village was strong. At least, that's what they led everyone to believe. Secretly the clan had been planning a coup d'état to take over Konoha. When the coup was discovered, the whole Uchiha clan had defected from the village, allied themselves with the Akatsuki, and declared war on Konoha. This had all occurred just over 1 year ago. Over the past year, Naruto and Sakura had grown closer through their shared suffering over the loss and betrayal of Sasuke. Naruto had feelings for Sakura ever since their days at the academy, but Sakura only had eyes for Sasuke. With him being gone and branded as a traitor to the village, the feelings Sakura once had for Sasuke appeared to have faded. Naruto finally had his opportunity to swoop in and claim the girl he had loved all this time. Naruto stopped just a few feet away from the medical tent where Sakura would be finishing up her morning rounding with the injured and ill. He bounced nervously on his feet, nodding in acknowledgement whenever an occasional fellow shinobi walked by. The familiar pinkette that he had been eager to see finally emerged. She was wearing the standard shinobi infantry uniform of dark pants and a long-sleeved shirt with a flak jacket that everyone, including Naruto, in the camp wore. She pushed back her heavy bangs which had become stuck to her forehead as she tried to suppress a yawn. By Naruto's guess, she had probably been awake since before dawn attending to her patients. Her emerald eyes then locked onto him and she smiled. "Hey Naruto. Hey Sakura." He waved as she walked over. "What brings you over here this morning? I thought you would be sleeping right now since Kakashi-sensei had you on watch all night." Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head and grinned nervously towards her. "Well, actually, there was something I wanted to talk to you about." "Sure, what is it?" Naruto was keenly aware of their shinobi comrades milling around them. Can we talk somewhere privately?" he asked. "Oh, sure," she replied as she led him towards the back of the medical tent into a separate room. "Only myself and certain medical nen are allowed back here," she stated as they arrived in the much quieter area. "No one should bother us now, so what's going on?" Naruto felt his heart start to race and his palms become sweaty. "I have something I need to tell you," he started. This past year has been rough, you know, with Sasuke betraying the village and me not being able to bring him back." Sakura's eyes fell downcast. "Yeah, I know," she reflected sadly. "But having you to lean on for support, it's meant a lot to me, Sakura," Naruto continued. Sakura's green eyes lifted up to meet his own blue ones and she smiled affectionately towards him. "It's meant a lot to me too, Naruto." A warm feeling surged in Naruto's chest as he felt encouraged by Sakura's words. "We've known each other for a long time, Sakura, and I've never told you just how much you mean to me." He looked away nervously from Sakura's intent gaze and rubbed the back of his head again. "I know we're here in a shinobi camp in the middle of a war, but I can't wait another day." "Naruto, what are you trying to say?" Sakura asked hesitantly. He dropped his hand and suddenly put all his focus back onto her. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you." Sakura's eyes widened, but then she looked down as if she had been caught doing something guilty. When the awkward and tense silence fell in the space between them, Naruto knew immediately that he was not going to get the reaction he had been hoping for all these years. "Naruto, I'm sorry, but I only see us as friends." Naruto looked away, trying to ignore the empty feeling of rejection that was overtaking his body. "You still love him, don't you?" he stated blankly. Sakura was taken aback by Naruto's reaction. "What are you talking about?" He stared back at her hard. He wasn't mad that she had rejected him. She didn't owe him her affection and it was her right to only want to be friends. However, he couldn't understand how she could hang on to feelings for someone that was never going to love her back. Someone who couldn't care less if she lived or died for that matter. He felt a surge of anger and frustration surge up inside him. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Sakura. I'm fine if you just want us to be friends, but I can't stand here anymore and watch you pine for Sasuke. He's a traitor to the village and he's never coming back." Her eyes narrowed bitterly towards him. "Don't talk about things you don't understand, Naruto." "I do understand, Sakura. I'm a guy who actually cares about you and all you can do is waste your time on somebody that no longer acknowledges that you even exist." Sakura looked away and wiped the corner of her eyes before Naruto could see the tears that were caused by his words. "You don't actually love me, Naruto," she said quietly. Naruto was surprised by her response. What? This is all about Sasuke," she continued. "You've always wanted to beat him in everything. In trying to be with me, you see it as a way to finally win against him." She brought her stern gaze back up to meet Naruto's shocked expression. "The fact that you brought Sasuke up immediately after I told you that I only wanted to be friends just proves that I'm right." Naruto stared back at her, taking in her words. He didn't know what to think or feel in that moment. How could she tell him that he didn't actually love her? Sure, he'd been jealous in the past that Sasuke had all of Sakura's affection, but nearly all of the other kunoichi in their class had a huge crush on Sasuke too, and Naruto didn't have feelings for any of them in that way. Him and Sakura had built a genuine friendship over the years as shinobi. For her to say that he only sees her as a way to one-up Sasuke was an insult to him. Yet, he still wanted to know one thing. "Do you still love Sasuke?" Sakura lowered her gaze once again. "Yes," she whispered. A red flash of anger bolted through Naruto's mind. "How can you still love him, Sakura? After all that he's done?" He tried to overthrow my dad. He tried to kill me. He even hurt you. What about what you've done?" Sakura screamed. The air in the room took on a grave silence. Sakura immediately regretted her words and brought her hands over her mouth, realizing her serious error. "Naruto, I'm sore." Naruto chuckled ironically. "I see, so that's what this is about." He turned away from her and then stepped towards the tent flap. Sakura reached her hand out towards him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Naruto. Please wait, I didn't mean what I said." Naruto stopped but didn't turn back around. "I'm sorry if my confession made you feel uncomfortable, Sakura." He then continued walking, leaving behind a sobbing Sakura, and ignoring all of the pointed stares of the other medical nin who had heard their yells. Naruto strode straight to his tent, ignoring any of his comrades who waved hello or tried to talk to him along the way. The exhaustion from the night before and his argument with Sakura had drained him completely. He wanted nothing more than to fall onto his cot and forget about everything that had just happened. When he finally arrived at the tent, he was annoyed to see Shikamaru, the camp's key strategist, standing by his bed. "What do you want, lazy ass?" Naruto asked irritably. "Man, I thought you would be sleeping already," Shikamaru replied plainly. "Well, that's what I'd like to do if you would just get the fuck out of my way." "Calm down, Naruto," Shikamaru continued. Unscathed by his friend's anger, "I was coming by to drop off a note from Captain Kakashi." Shikamaru held out a piece of paper which Naruto took from his hand. "He wants you to report to his tent at 1800 hours, the strategist continued as Naruto glanced at the note. "Okay fine, I'll be there. Now will you get out of my way so that I can finally get some damn sleep?" Shikamaru sighed as he strode out of the tent. "Man, you're such a drag sometimes, Naruto." Naruto reported to his captain's tent at the time he was told and found Kakashi leaning over his desk with two other Konoha shinobi, looking over a map and a few documents. Kakashi looked up and smiled when he saw his blonde-haired student. "Naruto, thank you for coming. I had no choice," Naruto replied quietly. "Ah, that's right. Could you leave us for a few minutes?" Kakashi asked the other two shinobi, who quickly complied with their captain's request and left the tent. Kakashi took a seat behind the desk and looked up at the blonde Jonin standing before him. "Well, I'll just get straight to the point then. Naruto, you're being summoned back to the village." Naruto's eyes widened at this piece of news. "What? But I'm only halfway done with my assignment. Why do I have to go back so early?" "This is what the Hokage has commanded." The Jinchuruki fell silent and looked down. "Is this because?" Kakashi sighed. "Yes, it is. You know that it happened again last night, don't you?" Naruto's head shot back up. He had blacked out again during part of his watch the night before, and when he came to, his arms and clothes had been caked in blood. He washed off in a nearby river and changed his uniform before anybody could notice. He had wanted to find the bodies of whoever he had killed before anyone else found them, but he ran out of time and had to return to his post. "How many was it this time?" Naruto asked quietly. "Only 3, but it was brutal. The Kyuubi literally shredded their bodies to pieces." "I see." Kakashi felt bad for Naruto, who was clearly racked with guilt over what he had done, or more precisely, what the Kyuubi had done while using his body. The boy had trained intensely for years to contain the Kyuubi's power after the 8-sign seal started to weaken when he turned 12. He even went on a 3-year training journey to Mount Myoboku with Master Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, to tame the demon fox contained in his body. When Naruto returned, he had successfully learned to control the Kyuubi and quickly became one of the village's strongest ninja. Then the Uchiha coup happened and Naruto allowed the power of the Kyuubi to control him in an effort to stop Sasuke. Not only was Naruto unsuccessful, but he nearly killed a squad of Konoha Jonin who had been sent to subdue him. Naruto was then placed on temporary suspension by the Hokage so that he could be monitored. The suspension was short-lived, however, when war was declared on Konoha by the powerful Uchiha clan, who had also joined forces with the Akatsuki. With being one of the village's top Jonin, Naruto was needed on the front lines in those early days of the war to protect the village. Naruto easily took down many of Konoha's enemies, but only through allowing the power of the Kyuubi to overtake him. Whenever he was in his Kyuubi state, Naruto was a literal killing machine. He had viciously slain over 100 enemy shinobi in a matter of months, which had quickly earned him the nickname, the Demon of Konoha. Even the other hidden villages and clans knew of Naruto's dark reputation in battle. 3 months ago, the Uchiha and the Akatsuki retreated and their whereabouts had largely remained unknown. Then that's when the Jinchuriki started to disappear. In an effort to gather more intelligence, and to take Naruto off the battlefield to give him time to control the Kyuubi again, the Hokage assigned his son to the Takigakure border camp they were at now. However, Naruto continued to lose control over the Kyuubi and the killings became more vicious. Naruto, this is the 12th episode that has happened since you arrived. The Hokage has become gravely concerned that things will only get worse if he allows you to stay here, so he is ordering you back to the village. You're to leave tonight with 2 escorts, Kakashi explained frankly. Naruto kept his gaze down on the ground, looking defeated. You think I'm a danger to everyone here, don't you? Kakashi didn't answer right away. He glanced at the small photo on his desk of him and a younger Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura back when they were genin under Kakashi's tutelage. He sighed again, yes. I do. Which is why I sent an emergency report to the Hokage early this morning letting him know of my concerns. Naruto continued to stare at the ground, not saying anything. It pained Kakashi to treat his student this way, but he was also responsible for the safety of the shinobi stationed at this camp. He had to do what he felt was best. Kakashi stood up and walked over to Naruto. You'll be leaving in 2 hours and you are to travel through the whole night, so I suggest taking some food pills with you. Kakashi then reached into his back pouch and pulled out a slip of paper with a seal on it. This will suppress the Kyuubi for 24 hours, it's for the protection of your 2 escorts. Naruto finally brought his head up to face his old sensei with a shaky resolve as he quietly allowed the seal to be placed onto his forehead. I'm sorry that things have to be this way, Naruto, Kakashi said quietly. Naruto had no response other than, am I dismissed now? Kakashi nodded his head. Yes, you are. Without another word, Naruto turned on his heel and strode out of the tent while his former sensei regretfully watched him leave. Naruto and his 2 escorts arrived at Konoha mid-morning without incident. The young shinobi was exhausted from traveling all night but he knew he had to report to his father right away. Thankfully, he was allowed to go by himself without the escorts to the Hokage office. Despite the humiliating reasons for being back in the village, Naruto couldn't help but feel some relief and comfort from being back home. Konoha was still a fairly young hidden village. Naruto was part of the village's 3rd generation. Konoha was founded by Hashirama and Tobirama Senju, 2 brothers who were hailed as the most powerful shinobi of their generation. The brothers had founded the village on the concept of creating a new shinobi system to replace their old ways of constant battle with rival clans. The brothers worked hard to lay down the system's foundation and build Konoha's infrastructure, but were killed in battle before they had the opportunity to lead and run the village. That duty ended up falling to the Senju brothers' apprentice, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Konoha's sandame. While he was technically the first Hokage to actually lead the village, Hiruzen insisted on the title of Sandame as he felt that the titles of Shodai and Nidame belonged to Hashirama and Tobirama respectively. After leading the village through the 2 great shinobi wars and slowly bringing stability to Konoha over the course of many years, Hiruzen passed away from old age. Before he passed, he named Minato Namikaze to become the Yondaime, who had been the village's Hokage for just over 5 years now. Naruto swelled with pride whenever he thought of his father. Minato was a legendary shinobi within the village, one who had natural talent combined with superior leadership skills. He won many victories for Konoha during the First and Second Great Shinobi Wars, and his speed had given him the nickname, the Yellow Flash. As Hokage, Minato's leadership quickly lived up to that of his predecessors. He successfully created temporary peace treaties with the other hidden villages of Suna, Kiri, and Kumo. Iwa did not agree to a treaty with any of the hidden villages, bringing more stability to Konoha. In recent months, a more permanent alliance had formed with Suna shortly after the new case Kage, Gaara, came into power. Though Minato wasn't able to stop the Uchiha from defecting, he was able to stop the clan from taking over the village through quick decisions and clever thinking when he had learned of the plot through local intelligence. The father and son duo had also been close for all of Naruto's life. With his mother dying shortly after his birth, Minato had raised Naruto all by himself. He supported Naruto and never stopped believing in him, despite the challenges that came with being a Jinchuriki and a hopeless ninja student at the academy. During the wars, Minato was forced to leave his son behind in Konoha but always made sure he was well taken care of in the company of his academy sensei, Iruka, and would write to his son from the battlefield often. After Naruto became a genin, Minato passed on his legendary jutsu to him, the Rasengan. He had also intended to teach Naruto the Hiraishin jutsu, but was elected Hokage before having the opportunity to put in the enormous time needed to teach such a powerful jutsu to a young genin. Naruto didn't mind though. Despite the enormous commitment that came with being Hokage, Minato would always be Naruto's father. A man that Naruto loved and respected no matter the difficulties they faced. As Naruto made his way to the Hokage's office, he couldn't help but notice the glares and hushed conversations that went on around him as he passed through the village. As a child, Naruto had been hated by many of the villagers for containing the beast that had brutally attacked their home on the night Naruto was born. It was thanks to an order from the Sandaime to never speak of the Kyuubi, as well as the protection of his father, that the villagers never acted on their hate, nor did Naruto's classmates at the academy know anything at the time about the Kyuubi being sealed inside him. Naruto fought hard to earn the respect of the village after becoming a genin. When Naruto came back from his 3-year training journey with Master Jiraiya and was appointed Chunin shortly afterwards, he had gained the respect and trust of the villagers as he protected Konoha from various threats that had appeared over the years with his own strength. Then he threw it all away after the Uchiha defection and his dark reputation from the battlefield quickly spread to the village. Now, Naruto didn't blame the villagers for looking at him with fear and contempt, because that's how he saw himself too. He finally arrived at the Hokage Tower and made his way up to his father's office. He knocked twice on the door to announce his arrival before letting himself in. Minato was sitting behind the Hokage desk writing up reports with the help of his aide, Shizune. The blonde-haired Hokage looked up and smiled warmly upon seeing his son, Naruto. "I'm happy to see you after all this time, my son." Naruto felt his burdens temporarily lift and couldn't help but grinning back at his father. He had missed him over these past 3 months. "It's good to see you too, old man." Minato chuckled then turned to Shizune. "Can you excuse us for a while? I have a few important matters to discuss with Naruto." "Of course, Lord Hokage." Shizune stood up and smiled politely towards the young Jonin. "Good to see you back, safe and sound, Naruto." "Thank you, Shizune." When Shizune left, Minato gestured to a chair just in front of his desk. "Have a seat." The tone in the room quickly shifted from a warm reunion to a tense friction between father and son. Both men knew that Naruto was not there under good circumstances. Naruto obeyed and sat down, giving a piercing gaze towards his father's stoic expression. "I don't think I have to explain why you're back in the village, Naruto." Naruto scoffed. "Well, I'm here under your orders." Minato closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This was going to be a long conversation. "Naruto, for Kakashi of all people to become so concerned that he recommended you be sent back to the village, well frankly, it's disturbing to me. He said the last attack was so brutal that they weren't able to find all of the body parts of the men that—" He trailed off as he carefully thought through his next choice of words. Naruto finished his sentence for him. "You mean of the men that I killed?" "No, the men that the Kyuubi killed. If you truly believe that, then why am I here?" Minato gazed back at his son's hardened, angry expression and sighed. "In a way you're right, Naruto. It was the Kyuubi who carried out those vicious killings, but the Kyuubi can only act in cooperation with your will." Naruto averted his gaze guiltily as he listened to his father's words. "I thought that taking you off the battlefield would give you an opportunity to regain control over the Kyuubi, but things have only gotten worse. And until we can get to the bottom of why you can no longer control the Kyuubi inside of you, I am placing you on in-house suspension." Naruto jerked his head up. "What? You'll still be allowed to go on missions, but only ones that don't take you away from the village," Minato continued, ignoring his son's outcry. "When you're not on missions, you'll be under observation by our analysis and medical teams to help you find the cause of why you cannot control the Kyuubi." "You can't do this to me, Dad," Naruto exclaimed as he stood up and slammed his palms onto Minato's desk. His body was shaking with rage and frustration. "Just give me one more chance. I promise I won't let you down this time." "You've already been given too many chances, Naruto," the Yondaime replied sternly. "This is what's best for the village and for you as well." Until you can learn to control the Kyuubi. I never asked for this fucking thing to be sealed inside me. Naruto shouted. A piercing silence settled between father and son. It always came down to this whenever the topic of the Kyuubi came up between Minato and Naruto. And when it did, there was nothing that Minato could say in retort because Naruto was right. He didn't ask for any of this. Naruto's mother, Kushina Uzumaki, had been the previous Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. After she gave birth, the seal containing the Kyuubi inside of her weakened significantly and an enemy shinobi took advantage by extracting the tailed beast from Kushina and releasing it onto the village. In order to save the village, Minato chose to seal the beast inside of his own infant son. Unfortunately, a Jinchuriki dies when their tailed beast is extracted from them, which is how Kushina had met her end that fateful night. Minato gazed back sympathetically towards his son's outraged expression. If it were up to Minato, there would be no need for tailed beasts and Jinchuriki in this world and his son could be a normal shinobi, free from the burden of containing such a powerful and feared creature. However, this was not their reality. Do you know why I sealed the Kyuubi inside of you, Naruto? Minato asked softly, not breaking his eye contact with his son. Naruto didn't answer. Minato continued, because I believe that one day, you can truly master its power and help bring an end to all this warfare for good. I believed that from the moment you were born and I continue to believe in it even now. Naruto's expression softened a little and he let go of the tension from his body upon hearing his father's supportive words. He slowly sat back down in the chair and brought his eyes downcast once again. How can you believe in me still, Dad? After all that I've done. Even I don't believe in myself anymore. Minato's heart felt heavy at seeing his son in such a difficult state, but he smiled warmly and stood up to ruffle Naruto's mop of blonde hair. Because I'm your father. It's as simple as that. One of the corners of Naruto's mouth lifted slightly. Hey, you know you're getting sappy in your old age. Minato smiled once again and sat back down. This is a difficult time for you, Naruto, but I know you'll get through it. Now, get some rest and report here at 8 in the morning. Please don't kill me. Please. Please. Naruto laughed at the cowering Iwa shinobi on the ground before him. The kid couldn't have been older than 15. The boy was shaking as he begged for his life. Pathetic. The Jinchuriki snarled his lips into a cruel smile. A real shinobi faces his death with no fear. You're a poor excuse for a ninja. The boy yelped helplessly as Naruto lifted him by the collar. I'll make your death nice and slow, that way you'll have plenty of time to think about your pitiful existence. No. Please, don't kill me. No. The young shinobi screams filled Naruto's ears as he rammed a clawed hand into the boy's throat, slicing through his esophagus. He dropped the Iwa shinobi carelessly onto the ground, watching him writhe and gurgle as blood streamed from his neck. The Jinchuriki watched the boy's drawn-out demise with a dark sense of satisfaction. Naruto heard himself laughing once again at the shinobi's pathetic death, his blood saturating the ground. His laughing ceased when he noticed the blood moving strangely. Was it moving on its own? He bent forward to get a closer look. The blood suddenly formed into a large mouth of sharp teeth and lunged at Naruto, swallowing him whole before he had a chance to react. The Jinchuriki suddenly found himself in what appeared to be a dark cell. He was standing ankle-deep in a pool of water that emitted a strange, musty odor. Naruto tried to move his neck to get a better look around but found his body to be completely frozen in place. What the hell is going on? Naruto. The young Jonin felt his bones grow cold at the frightening growl that just spoke his name. He tried again to move his body but his muscles refused to obey. Who's there? Who the fuck are you? He yelled to the unknown, menacing voice. He was answered with the sound of a disturbing chuckle that reverberated through his entire body. You should already know who I am. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Naruto bellowed. Now how do I get out of here? The voice didn't answer. Instead, all Naruto could hear was a sick laughter that seemed to be mocking him. The Jinchuriki cursed to himself as he struggled to move. The laughter started getting louder, as if someone was getting closer and closer to him. As it crescendoed, Naruto could hear what sounded like people screaming. The sound terrified him and sent his heartbeat into a frenzy. I can't move. He struggled desperately to move his body as the sounds became so loud, he could no longer hear his own thoughts. Naruto then felt something wrap around his neck and squeezed until the airway in his throat was completely closed off. Saliva dribbled from his mouth as he slowly suffocated. "You're too weak to deny me anymore." Naruto's eyes shot open, his breathing was ragged. After having a long day, he had snuck off to a hillside on the outskirts of the village just by the Senju River and must have nodded off when he lay down on the grass. These disturbing nightmares were a new phenomenon, having started shortly after arriving back at the village, and they became more vivid each time. He had been back in the village for a week and was spending his time doing missions within Konoha and having his mind examined by the analysis team. The missions were mostly simple guard work around classified meetings within the village or delivering encoded messages to the Hokage office. They were all B-ranked and above. Minato had spared his son the embarrassment of carrying out errands and chores for the villagers just as he did in his early genin days. The sessions with the analysis team had not been going well either. Several members of the team had attempted to enter Naruto's mind only to be blocked by the powerful chakra of the Kyuubi. For Naruto though, this was somewhat of a relief to him. He said nothing about the nightmares he had been having as he was sure that they would go away eventually, and he didn't want to give his father any reasons to extend Naruto's suspension. He wanted to regain control of the Kyuubi so that he could serve his village properly, but he wanted to accomplish this on his terms. Naruto felt isolated and lost though. Between Sakura rejecting him and being pulled from his mission early to essentially be placed on house arrest, Naruto felt humiliated and empty. A few of his friends were still posted in the village but he had been avoiding them all week. He was too embarrassed to face them just yet. And Sasuke? That overwhelming feeling of failure still haunted Naruto. He understood that the young man who had once been his best friend was now a grave threat to the village. If Naruto were to ever encounter Sasuke directly, it was his duty as a Konoha Jonin to kill Sasuke through whatever means possible. Yet, Naruto couldn't help but feel that he had let Sasuke down somehow. The two had formed a unique bond during their time as shinobi together and Naruto had thought that Sasuke would have trusted him with anything. But he was wrong. Not only that, he couldn't even persuade Sasuke to stay with the village that he had faithfully served his whole life. Even after he allowed the Kyuubi to take over him in an effort to make Sasuke stay by force, he still wasn't strong enough. If Naruto wasn't strong enough to save one friend, how could he ever hope to attain his dream of being Hokage someday? He laid back down on his back with his hands behind his head, staring up at the pink and orange clouds just above him as he contemplated. His view was suddenly interrupted by the smiling, calm face of the Yondaime. "Ah, there you are, Dad." Naruto jumped up with a shock. "Don't scare me like that, Yano." Minato chuckled. "Sorry Naruto, I didn't mean to scare you." He then sat down on the grass and gestured next to him. Naruto complied and the two sat quietly watching the river stream by in front of them for a while. "How are things between you and Sakura?" Minato asked, breaking the silence. Naruto visibly tensed but kept his gaze at the river ahead of him. "There's nothing between us," he quietly replied. Minato looked over at his son and saw his dejected expression. "It's just as I suspected, Sakura still rejected him even with Sasuke out of the picture now." The Yondaime sighed and turned back to look at the river. "Well, I received some good news this morning," Minato said. Changing the topic, "Hiyashi Hyuga and I have finally reached an agreement that would officially make the Hyuga clan a part of the village." Naruto glanced over at his father. He knew that his father had been working hard towards such an alliance ever since he became Hokage, but given the current distractions and recent disappointments in his life, he couldn't bring himself to be much interested in the news. "That's good," Minato nodded, ignoring his son's clear lack of interest in the topic. "They're the most powerful clan in the Land of Fire. Even more powerful than the Senju and Uchiha, in my opinion. To have them as allies will help to further strengthen the village." Minato looked over again towards his son who was still gazing towards the river with a bored expression on his face. "Naruto, you actually have a very significant role to play in this alliance," he continued. This grabbed the blonde Jinchuriki's attention who snapped his head over towards his father. "What, me?" Minato smiled and nodded. "I know you won't like the idea at first, but hear your father out." Naruto stared back at his dad, unsure and hesitant over what he would say next. Minato continued, "You see Naruto, alliances such as these traditionally do best when sealed with an arranged marriage." Naruto's eyes widened. "You're joking, right?" Minato held his hands up with a sheepish smile on his face. "Now like I said Naruto, hear your father out." I know a lot of modern changes have occurred for your generation, but arranged marriages haven't completely died out. Naruto was familiar with the point Minato was making. Most of his friends' parents were in arranged marriages. Naruto's own parents were one of few that married for love in their generation. Also, the recent alliance between Suna and Konoha had been sealed with an engagement between Shikamaru and the Kasuke's sister, Tamari. The two were to be married next month just before the Rinne festival. But what many people your age don't realize is that there is a practicality with arranged marriages, Minato continued. The match isn't necessarily determined by convenience. They're carefully selected by two families who know each other well enough to have confidence that their children would be a good partner for one another. I've known Hiyashi Hyuga for many years now, and while I can't say that I know his eldest daughter just as well, based on my few meetings with her and from what I've learned about her from Hiyashi, I have confidence that she would be a good match for you, Naruto. That's it, I've heard enough. The Jinchuriki interrupted as he abruptly stood up and glared down at his father. It's bad enough that you have control over my career as a shinobi, but now you want to control who I spend the rest of my life with? This has nothing to do with controlling you, his father replied calmly. At least let me finish what I have to say before you start overreacting. Naruto begrudgingly complied and sat back down on the ground near his father, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. Naruto, I would never have agreed to this proposed arrangement if I thought there was any possibility that it would make you miserable. Naruto glanced inquisitively towards his father. The reason why your mother didn't struggle to control the Kyuubi was because of the love her and I shared. I want nothing more than for you to have a similar love with a person that you can spend your life with. Naruto's gaze slightly softened as he uncrossed his arms. Hiyashi's eldest daughter, Hinata, is around your age. And while she's led a different life from yours, I think you would be surprised at just how much you two have in common if you both are open to getting to know the other. Minato shifted his weight so that he was looking directly at his son. And Naruto, let me be clear on one thing. This will be your decision in the end. Naruto shot his head up in surprise. What? Didn't you just say that the arrangement is already done? Minato shook his head. The alliance between Konoha and the Hyuga is all but done. The arrangement between you and Hinata is merely a proposal for now. I strongly encourage you to at least be open to it, but I would never force something like this upon you. I've already discussed this with Hiyashi. If you decide not to marry Hinata, we will find other ways to seal the alliance. All I want is for you to be happy. Naruto took his gaze down towards the grass beneath them as he took in his father's words. He thought that he had loved Sakura for all these years only to find out that he had been wrong all this time. Who was he to say what love is? Maybe his father had a point with this whole arranged marriage thing. Shikamaru didn't speak much about his own arranged upcoming marriage, but the guy didn't seem to be miserable about it. Naruto mentally shook his head. What was he thinking? This whole idea was ludicrous. Sure, things didn't work out with Sakura, but that didn't mean that he was willing to get married to someone he never met before. He would like to be married with a family of his own someday, but not now. He had too many other matters to attend to in his life instead of courting some girl from the Hyuga clan to appease his dad. No, if his dad was giving him a choice, then Naruto wasn't going to bother with any of this. I only have one request, son, Minato said before Naruto had a chance to voice his decision to decline the arrangement. Join me for dinner at the Hyuga compound tomorrow evening. It would just be me, you, Lord Hiyashi, and Lady Hinata. You should at least meet her first before making any final decisions. I promise that this will be all that I ask of you. Naruto clenched his fist around his pant leg before biting out, fine. He then stood up once more. Is that all, Dad? He asked irritably. Oh yes, I almost forgot. The Yondaime stood up and rummaged around in his flak jacket. I'm sure you want to see what she looks like. She's actually a very pretty young lady, Minato said as he handed his son a picture, which Naruto stuffed immediately into one of the pockets of his own jacket without so much of a glance at it. Now is that it, Dad? Minato smiled, unfazed by his son's attitude. Yes, it is. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Naruto. We'll talk more in my office tomorrow morning. Naruto turned around to walk away. Night, Dad, he said without looking back. Minato still smiled as he watched his son's retreating form. His stubbornness certainly rivals yours, Kushina, he said to himself. After enjoying 3 bowls of his favorite ramen at Ichiraku's, Naruto arrived at the male shinobi barracks where he lived, or more accurately, where he laid his head at night. The barracks never felt like home to him. It was just a place where he stored his belongings and had a bed to sleep on. He grew up in an apartment with his father until he went on his 3-year training journey to Mount Myoboku when he was 13, which was right around the time his father became Hokage. When Naruto returned, his father had moved into the Hokage residence, and not wanting to feel singled out from his shinobi comrades, Naruto opted to move into the male barracks where several of his other friends were already staying at the time. He had fond memories of late-night card games and hanging out with the guys. Nowadays, it was rare when all of them were in the village. Ever since the war started, most of Naruto's friends had been split up to various posts around the Land of Fire. There were a few that Naruto hadn't even seen for nearly a year now. Big brother Naruto. Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by a young teenage boy just in front of him. Naruto smiled and waved. "Oh hey, Konoharamu." Konoharamu was a few years younger than Naruto and had recently been promoted to Chunin rank. The boy was the grandson of the late Sandaime. Orphaned by the Second Shinobi War, Konoharamu was raised by his grandfather. But when the old man passed, Konoharamu came to live at the barracks since he was already a genin at the time. The boy still had a few living relatives, such as his uncle Asuma, to look out for him, but the young Chunin always had a strong admiration for Naruto, who in turn always watched over him like an older brother would. "I've been looking for you for hours now," Konoharamu explained as he ran over to Naruto. "Where have you been, big bro?" Naruto smiled sheepishly at him. "Oh, I just wanted to get away for a little while to clear my head, that's all." Konoharamu nodded, quickly accepting Naruto's response, and changed the subject. "I wanted to show you how far I've come with my Rasengan training. I'm getting so close to actually forming the chakra into the right shape. You gotta come see what I can do," the boy explained excitedly. Naruto smiled. It made him happy to still Konoharamu's respect and admiration, despite knowing about recent events. "Actually, Konoharamu, I'm going to have to take a rain check on seeing the progress of your training." "What? Why? I've got a lot on my mind right now and I'd be too distracted to give you any pointers." "Alright, fine. You can just watch me tomorrow night then." Naruto winced inwardly as he remembered the dreaded dinner that he had to attend to. "So, I have this thing I have to go to with my dad tomorrow. But the night after tomorrow I'll come watch you. I promise." Naruto brought his fist towards Konoharamu, who cautiously looked down before grinning once again. "That's a promise, boss," the boy exclaimed as he bumped his fist with Naruto's. "I know you don't go back on your word." Naruto entered his room, relieved that he could finally relax. He untied his Hite-8 and placed it onto his dresser. He threw his flak jacket onto the bed and took off his shirt. He fell backwards onto his mattress and sighed. He opened his azure eyes to stare at the plain, wooden ceiling just above him. "I want nothing more than for you to have a similar love with a person that you can share your life with. All I want is for you to be happy." His father's words echoed through his mind. Naruto flipped onto his stomach and threw a pillow over his head, as if it would block all of the rambling thoughts from his brain. How could his dad expect him to be happy by proposing a marriage to a girl he didn't know? Naruto couldn't wait to get this stupid dinner over with so that he could tell his dad that he wanted nothing to do with this arrangement. There were many things out of control in Naruto's life, but who he would marry is something that he alone would decide. He shifted his legs over his flak jacket that was still on the bed and he heard something drop to the floor. He lifted his head and saw the small picture that his dad had given to him earlier. He still hadn't bothered to look at it, but would be lying if he said that he wasn't curious as to what Hinata looked like. He bent over to take the picture off the floor and flipped it around as he leaned back onto the bed. One of his eyebrows raised curiously as he studied the picture. It was black and white, but it was a portrait of a girl around his age with long dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a light-colored kimono along with a kanzashi flower pinned in her hair, just above her bangs. She wore a small, gentle smile on her face, but it was her eyes that stood out. The Hyuga were known for their pale, pupil-less eyes that were often cold and expressionless, but Hinata's were different. Her eyes were kind and warm, and there was a genuineness to her expression in the photo that Naruto was oddly mesmerized by. Maybe tomorrow's dinner wouldn't be that bad after all. Hinata walked through the halls of the Hyuga mansion with her head held high. She was elegantly beautiful this evening with a shimmery midnight blue kimono that accentuated her porcelain skin. The kimono was embroidered with white butterflies and violet flowers towards the bottom of her sleeves and hem, all held together with a silver obi. She wore her dark hair down, save for the shorter pieces that normally fell next to her cheeks, which were tied back into a loose bun behind her head with 2 silver, ornate pins. Tonight she and her father were having dinner with her supposed future fiancé and father-in-law. After the news had sunk in that a marriage was being proposed between her and one of the most dangerous shinobi out of Konoha, Hinata was able to find a silver lining. This was her chance to restore her self-honor as well as to do her part to ensure the future of her clan was bright, particularly for those from the branch family. It was for those reasons alone that Hinata had spent the whole day brushing up on her knowledge on topics such as futon ninjutsu, the history of Konoha's Hokages, and the Uchiha clan. It was also the reason why she had selected her favorite kimono to wear tonight. She would play the role of the type of woman that Naruto Namikaze would want to marry, and she would play it well. However, she refused to ever fall in love with him. That was the only way she could maintain any sense of control over the situation. She would stay focused on her end goal of creating a better life for the poorer members of her clan. She also realized that she probably wouldn't see much of Naruto anyway after they were married. A shinobi of his rank would be off on missions the majority of the time, especially if a war were still going on. Once they were married, she couldn't care less if he was rarely home with her or even if he took up a mistress back in Konoha. Fate had already taken away her one chance for a life of love. If a life of duty was what was in store for her, then so be it. Hinata reached the formal dining room where her father was waiting for her and stopped to take a deep breath before placing her hand over the shoji door to slide it open. Like a warrior stepping into battle, Hinata entered the room with determination to face her fate. Naruto walked 2 steps behind his father as they made their silent journey towards the Hyuga compound. He had spent most of his day with his father's assistant, Shizune, as she gave him a crash course about the Hyuga's traditional customs and mannerisms. Despite her best efforts, Shizune had abruptly ended the etiquette lesson by telling Naruto he would do best to keep his big mouth shut for most of the evening. The blonde ninja's brash mannerisms were clearly something that would not be tamed to the Hyuga's polished standards in just one day. The 2 men were dressed in their formal shinobi uniform, which was similar to their combat uniform with the difference being a uniform jacket instead of a flak jacket over a long-sleeved shirt. Naruto also had a red armband over his left bicep with the Konoha leaf symbol, which indicated his rank as a Jonin, while Minato wore his Hokage Haori over his uniform. Naruto's stomach tightened up with each step that took them closer to the compound. He still had no idea why his father thought that Naruto would be open at all to something like this. Sure, Hinata was a pretty young woman, but there was no way that an unconventional smart-ass like him could ever fit in with the conservative, uptight Hyuga clan. He was eager to get this evening over with so that he could tell his dad that there was no way he was going through with an arranged marriage. "Ah, we're almost there," Minato exclaimed, interrupting Naruto's train of thought. Naruto looked up and could see the tall wooden gates of the compound just several yards in front of them. As they got closer, the tall tiled roof of the Hyuga mansion could be seen peeking over the gate. "Shit, this clan is more loaded than I thought," Naruto thought in dumbstruck to himself. When they reached the gate, there were 2 guards standing post. Both bowed towards Minato, with the one on the left greeting, "Lord Hokage. Thank you for coming, Lord Hiashi is expecting both of you." "Follow me." "Great, thank you," Minato responded back. As they followed the Hyuga guard, Naruto couldn't help but notice the well-kept grounds and the ornate statues that lined their path to the mansion. With the exception of the capital, Naruto had never been to such an opulent place. If this clan was so well off, Naruto thought to himself, why would they want to join forces with a working-class village like Konoha? When they finally entered the mansion, the inside was even more lavish than the outside. Paper shoji walls lined the hallways, decorated with colorful artwork and ornate decorations. The smooth wooden floors were pristine and nearly glistened underneath the silver candle-lit chandeliers that hung elegantly above. They continued to follow the guard down what seemed to be an endless maze until they finally reached a set of closed shoji doors. The guard slid one of the doors open enough to allow him to speak to whoever was on the other side, but not enough for Naruto to actually see who was in there. "Lord Hiashi, your guests have arrived," the guard announced. "Good," a stern voice answered, "send them in." Yes, sir, the guard bowed and then turned towards the two Konoha visitors. Naruto's heartbeat became faster and his palms started to sweat as he watched the guard slide the shoji door further to reveal the occupants on the other side. Lord Hiyashi and Lady Hinata will see you both now, the guard said before stepping away. Thank you, Minato answered back. On the other side of the doors was a tall man close to Minato's age, with long dark hair and featureless pale eyes. He wore a traditional kimono and hakama pants with a dark haori, which had the Hyuga clan symbol etched on the front. The man wore a deep frown on his hardened face, making Naruto further nervous to meet the man who was proposed to be his own father-in-law someday. Hiyashi, good to see you again so soon. Minato greeted warmly as he stepped into the room. The frown on Hiyashi's face immediately turned into an amiable smile as he moved in to hug Minato, much to Naruto's shock. Minato, it's good to see you as well, my friend. Naruto stared at them for a moment, trying to process two of the most powerful men in the Land of Fire being so casual and informal with one another. The young shinobi then hesitantly turned his attention to the young woman standing just behind Hiyashi. She was a young, petite woman wearing a dark blue kimono and had long indigo hair that went down to her mid-back. She had a little bit of makeup on, just enough to highlight her pearlescent eyes and kind face. She smiled as she watched the two men greet one another before her eyes drifted to where Naruto was. The blonde Jinchuriki quickly looked nervously away when she made eye contact. You must be Naruto, I'm glad to finally meet you, Hiyashi said cordially as he turned his attention towards the young man. I've heard so much about you from your father over the years. Naruto remained frozen in place, unsure of how to properly respond to the Hyuga clan head. It was then that Minato discreetly shoved his elbow into his son's side, making him bend over to bow towards Hiyashi. The pleasure is all mine, sir. Naruto answered stiffly before shakily straightening back up. The corner of Hiyashi's mouth twitched slightly in amusement at Naruto's obvious uneasiness. He then gestured for the young woman in the room to step forward. This is my daughter, Hinata. Hinata bowed smoothly towards both of them and smiled warmly. It's an honor to see you again, Lord Hokage, and to meet you as well, Naruto, she greeted softly. Lady Hinata, it's good to see you again as well. You've certainly grown quite a bit since I last saw you, Minato said. The room then waited on Naruto to say something back, but the young man found himself frozen in place once again. Hinata was much prettier up close and her mannerisms were more elegant than what Naruto was used to in comparison to the other girls he was usually around. His head was spinning over the fact that this young woman was being proposed to become his wife someday. He felt his father jab him once again, making Naruto clench his eyes and bend forward awkwardly. Nice to meet you too, Hinata. Oh shit, was I supposed to call her Lady Hinata? Or ma'am? Or am I allowed to just call her Hinata? Damn, I'm not used to all this formal crap. Hinata studied the nervous young man in front of her and felt her own emotions mirroring his. Her stomach was in knots and she had to stop herself from fidgeting too much with her hands. In front of her was supposed to be the infamous demon of Konoha, a shinobi possessed by the feared Kyuubi spirit who had slaughtered hundreds of enemies in battle. Yet, all she could see right now was a boy who was frightened by his surroundings and the prospect of meeting his future wife and father-in-law. Minato clapped his son on the shoulder, subtly bringing him back up to a standing position. I don't know about the rest of you, but I can sure go for something to eat soon. Shall we all sit down for dinner? Hiyashi nodded in agreement. Yes, let's have a seat in the dining room. Our meal should be ready. The two Hyuga hosts then led the way into an adjacent room. Minato squeezed Naruto's shoulder reassuringly. Just relax and enjoy the company, my son. Dinner was fairly uneventful. Hiyashi and Minato swapped old war stories and discussed current politics occurring within their realms of responsibility like old friends do. Meanwhile, Naruto and Hinata sat across from one another in awkward silence, slowly picking at their food. Hinata would occasionally smile over towards her father and his old friend whenever a humorous story or a clever remark came up, but Naruto remained still during the course of their meal. His nerves had killed his appetite and he also wasn't used to the rich foods provided by the Hyuga household. He'd gladly take his Ichiraku ramen or even his field rations over tonight's meal. Hinata couldn't help but notice Naruto's clear disinterest in being there. He hadn't spoken a word to her all evening, nor had he even looked at her. She had started the evening determined to be the confident, sociable woman she had always aspired to be instead of the shy, timid girl she actually was. This arrangement was certainly not her first choice, but it was her last chance to redeem herself and actually do something good for her clan. She would not let the past repeat itself. Yet when the four of them sat down to dinner, and her and Naruto were left on their own to start a conversation, all of the topics that Hinata had planned out in her head ahead of time quickly slipped away. There were a few moments where Hinata felt brave enough to overcome her nervousness, but each time she glanced over at the blonde shinobi across from her, her overwhelming shyness took over and she would quickly look back down towards her food. As the meal neared its end, Hinata felt the heat of embarrassment all over her body and a solid rock of nerves lying in the pit of her stomach. She was a fool to think that she could suddenly transform herself into a charming, sociable young woman through sheer willpower and a pretty kimono. She pushed her food to the side of her plate feeling defeated. Naruto and Lord Hokage would leave tonight, and then her father would call her into his office the following morning to inform her that Naruto would not be going through with the arrangement. She would disappoint her father and let down her clan once again as a hopeless failure. As the servants took away the last plates from the table, Minato and Hiashi exchanged knowing glances with the other. It was not lost on them that their children had not spoken a single word to each other during the whole meal. Hiashi cleared his throat. "Hinata?" Hinata snapped out of her thoughts and looked over. "Yes, father? Lord Hokage and I have some private business to discuss for a little while. Why don't you take Naruto on a tour of the gardens? It would give you two some time to get to know each other a little better without the interfering presence of your fathers," Hiashi suggested. Hinata felt all the blood in her face rushing to her cheeks but managed to forge a small smile. "I would be happy to, father," she bowed respectfully towards Hiashi before standing up from the table and turning towards Naruto, too nervous to look at him directly, "And Naruto, follow me this way please." As Hinata stepped quietly out of the room, Naruto stole an uncomfortable glance towards his father who was gazing sternly back at him. Quickly getting the hint, Naruto scrambled to his feet to follow the young lady. "Sure, right behind you," he called out. When the would-be couple left, the two men remaining in the room sighed. "My apologies, Hiashi. I knew that Naruto would not be very receptive to the idea of an arranged marriage, but I thought that he at least would have made an effort to at least have a conversation with Hinata tonight," Minato mused out loud. "There's no need to apologize for your son's demeanor, Minato. After all, I wasn't keen on this idea either," the Hyuga leader replied. The Yondaime gave a rueful grin. "Yes, that's true. I was the one who had to convince you that my son and your daughter would potentially be a good match for each other." Hiashi sighed. "Given Hinata's recent embarrassment a few months ago, I only want her to be happy. She's grown up with a heavy burden on her shoulders placed by our clan's elders. I'm still worried about history repeating itself, but if your son is really the man you say he is, I think this could work out." Minato nodded in agreement but was curious about something. "Hiashi, how did you persuade Hinata to support the arrangement with her and Naruto?" Hiashi took a sip of his tea and placed the cup firmly back onto the table. "I'm not proud of this, but I didn't give Hinata a choice about the arrangement." Minato's eyes slightly widened in surprise. Hiashi continued, "Hinata was raised to place duty before anything else, and at the end of the day, that is what she follows. If I had approached this with her as a proposal that would make her happy, she never would have gone along with it. In her mind, her chance at happiness has already been taken away from her." Minato studied his friend's sad expression before glancing down. "I see. But be rest assured, Namikaze," Hiashi started again, looking determinedly towards his old friend, "I will not allow my daughter to suffer any more embarrassment or hurt than she already has. I appreciate you as a father, allowing your son to have a choice in all of this, but your son will have to make his decision swiftly or I will make it for him." Minato held his hands up sheepishly. "Of course, I understand, Hiashi. Give Naruto a chance. I have full confidence that he will make the right choice here." Hiashi gave a self-assured smile before sipping his tea again. "I hope you're right, my friend." The young couple had been walking in silence for the past 10 minutes, save for Hinata's occasional remark about a particular feature in the gardens and Naruto's stiff responses. The blonde shinobi observed the pretty young woman walking in front of him. She was clearly uncomfortable with having to entertain him while their fathers were having their private meeting, but at least she was trying. He on the other hand had made no effort so far this evening to make the whole experience any less awkward. If anything, his lack of effort probably made things worse. He sighed to himself. Hinata had to be just as dissatisfied with the proposed marriage as he was, and there was no point in further punishing her with his indifference. So, I mean Lady Hin, he started, prompting both of them to stop and Hinata to turn around. Naruto nervously rubbed the back of his head. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at all this formal stuff. What's the right name to call you by? Hinata was surprised by Naruto's question, but from the sheepish expression on his whiskered face, she could tell that he was being sincere. It was hard to believe that she was standing in front of a man that was the vessel to the feared Kyuubi. She gave him a small, reassuring smile. You can just call me Hinata. Naruto relaxed and smiled back at her, easy enough. He then realized that she was waiting on him to finish what he had started to say earlier. So, these gardens look pretty big, he observed. How much time does it take to care for all this? Hinata's earlier nerves calmed down though Naruto's simple question on a topic she was very knowledgeable about. Actually, we have a small team of clansmen who are very skilled at gardening to take care of the mansion grounds full-time, she answered. I also have a small section that I take care of myself. Her response surprised Naruto. From looking at her and knowing about her high-class upbringing, he would assume that the Hyuga princess wouldn't go anything near something that even resembled manual labor. Really? He replied, whereat? Hinata's expression brightened. I can show you. There's something that I wanted to check on anyway. Naruto grinned. Lead the way. He followed her down a small stone path and over a wooden bridge that sat over one of the vast koi ponds in the gardens. They stopped just in front of a dormant cherry blossom tree with a small stone bench nearby. Naruto could see a small patch of dirt with a wooden trellis wrapped with flowing green stems and buds. Hinata knelt down in front of the trellis and delicately lifted one of the buds with her fingers. Not tonight I guess, she sighed. What is that? Naruto asked. Hinata smiled at him and replied, this is a moonflower. Moonflower? Yes. Normally they're very difficult to grow this time of year, but one of the gardeners helped me to find just the right spot that would help give it the best chance of thriving. She stood up and turned towards her blonde guest. What's special about the moonflower is that it only blooms a few times before it dies, and it will only bloom at night time. I've been checking every night since it started to grow to see if the flowers have bloomed. Naruto raised one of his eyebrows quizzically. Seems like a lot of work for a flower that only one person will ever see. Hinata smiled. Yes, perhaps it is, but, she turned towards her beloved flower once again. I think that only makes the flower more beautiful. It's easy to admire a flower that blooms in the daylight for many weeks so that it can be seen by everyone. But it's also easy to take a flower like that for granted. That's why I'm so drawn to the moonflower. The fact that it will only bloom a few times makes me pay more attention to it and appreciate its beauty even more. Naruto watched Hinata with slight fascination as she shared her deep musings over something as simple as a flower and would be lying if he said that he wasn't mesmerized by her line of thinking. Hinata suddenly jolted, as if someone had pinched her, and she quickly turned back towards Naruto. I am sorry. I didn't mean to ramble on like that. I must sound so silly, she lamented with embarrassment. Naruto gave her one of his reassuring namikaze grins. Hey, don't worry about it, Hinata. I actually think it's pretty cool that you've put so much care and thought into something like that. I haven't met many people who think the way you do. That last comment made the Hyuga princess blush, causing Naruto to look away nervously and rub the back of his head once again. I mean that as a compliment, of course, he added. Hinata smiled as she tried to tone down her blush. Thank you, Naruto, that's very kind of you to say. She stepped away from her small, personal garden and went towards the path they came from. I'm sure that you and your father will need to head home soon, so we should return to the mansion, she said as she turned towards Naruto. He nodded in reply. Yeah, okay. The two walked beside the other on their journey back. Their conversation along the way was still limited to the topic of the various sights and features of the Hyuga grounds, but it came easier this time around. Minato and Naruto were quietly making their way back to Konoha from the Hyuga compound. The Yondaime glanced over towards his son, who had been silent since they left to return to the village. Well, Naruto, you know I'm a man of my word and I promised that tonight's dinner was all that I would be asking of you. The rest of this is all up to you. So, what did you think of Lady Hinata? Naruto stopped. When the evening started, he couldn't wait to reach this moment where he could tell his dad about how terrible of an idea this all was. Yet now, he found himself seriously pondering his father's question and kept seeing the image of Hinata kneeling in her small garden, talking passionately about the beauty of the flower she had been patiently waiting to bloom. There was a glimmer in her pearlescent eyes as she had spoke that Naruto found himself strangely drawn to. The idea of getting married to someone he barely knew was still absurd to him, but the idea of getting to know the Hyuga princess better, now that was something that he couldn't get out of his head. He lifted the corner of his mouth into a pleased smirk before responding to his father's question. Actually, I kind of like her. A young man briskly walked through the winding hallways of an underground cavern. The man had his ash-gray hair tied behind his head and wore black, circular-rimmed glasses. His name was Kabuto Yakushi, one of the most powerful medical nin in the Akatsuki. He was eager to report to his master, Orochimaru, on the latest intelligence received regarding a certain Jinchuriki they had yet to capture. Lord Orochimaru, Kabuto greeted as he entered the room where his master was currently sitting. The long-haired, snake-eyed man lifted his head and gave a venomous smirk towards his subordinate. "Ah, Kabuto, any new developments as to where our sly little fox is hiding?" he inquired with his unsettlingly smooth voice. The medical nin nodded. "As we suspected, Naruto has been called away from the Takigakure border back to Konoha. Our sources indicate that he'll be there for quite some time." Orochimaru leaned back in his chair with a satisfied glint in his eyes. "Excellent, our plan to attack Konoha and capture the Kyuubi can finally be set into motion." Kabuto grinned maliciously. "Yes, I've already alerted our forces in Oto. They're running practice drills of the attack as we speak." "Good," the snake summoner stated as he stood up and walked over to his right-hand man. "Our patience will soon be rewarded." His disturbing chuckle echoed off the cavern walls. It had been a week since that dinner at the Hyuga compound and word about the alliance had gotten out on both sides. Unfortunately, some were vehemently against the idea of the Hyuga clan becoming part of Konoha. A few of the clan heads in Konoha were fearful of a repeat of the Uchiha coup, while some of the elders and members of the main Hyuga household were resistant to joining a village that was engaged in a grueling war. Not to mention, many of the Hyuga were concerned over the protection of their Kekkei Genkei, the Byakugan. This meant that Minato and Hiashi had a few more rough edges to smooth over than they initially expected, and thus any formal announcement of an engagement between a member from each side would have to be put off. Even though Naruto had not officially agreed to the proposed marriage between him and Hinata, it was clear that he wasn't vehemently against it as he was in the beginning. His father had strongly encouraged him to take advantage of the extra time that was being given to him to get to know Hinata a little better. It was now solely on Naruto to continue any contact with the Hyuga princess, but the young Jinchuriki had a hard time coming up with a way to see Hinata again without coming across as being too eager. Hinata never left the confines of the Hyuga property, so the only Naruto could interact with her would be through a formal request to visit with her at the compound, which was too awkward and traditional for Naruto's taste. He was simply interested in getting to know her and that was it. He had no idea if he would even want to date Hinata, let alone marry her. Something else that bothered him too was that he didn't know how Hinata felt about all this. For all he knew, this proposed arranged marriage was ruining her life and he had no desire to do that to her, no matter what. Naruto had not seen much of his father over the past week, but Minato must have somehow figured out that his son was running into trouble in finding an opportunity to see Hinata again, so he handed Naruto one today. Currently, Naruto was on his way to the Hyuga compound to deliver a sealed message from the Hokage to Hiashi Hyuga, and Naruto was specifically instructed to personally hand the scroll to the Hyuga leader himself. The blonde shinobi found himself trotting swiftly down the path from Konoha that led to the Hyuga compound. He'd be lying to himself if he said that he wasn't a little bit excited about the idea of running into Hinata while he was there. When he reached the estate, he saw two Hyuga guards standing by the main gate. Naruto straightened his flak jacket and walked confidently over to the guards. "Excuse me, sir," he stated, "I have a message from Lord Hokage to deliver to Lord Hiashi." "Thank you for delivering it," one of the guards answered and held his hand out. "I'll make sure that he receives it." Naruto tightened his grip on the scroll. "Actually, I was given an order to deliver the message in person to him. If you'd like, I can wait out here until Lord Hiyashi is ready to see me." The guard stared back at the determined blonde shinobi for a moment before his colleague leaned over and whispered something into his ear, prompting the guard to nod in reply. The other guard then returned to his position and looked over at Naruto. "Very well, Mr. Namikaze, follow me." Naruto flinched at being addressed so formally but was satisfied to be allowed inside. He followed the guard into the mansion and through several winding hallways until they reached a small courtyard. "Lord Hiyashi is currently in a meeting, but I'll let him know of your presence," the guard stated. "Thank you." Naruto watched the guard walk away as he sighed and took a seat at the edge of one of the ledges looking over the courtyard. Though he was alone now, he knew damn well that there had to be at least 5 Hyuga guards watching him carefully in that moment. Just because Hiyashi was good friends with the Hokage didn't mean that the clan trusted the Yondaime's son to not do any harm while on their grounds. He looked across the way and observed a few Hyuga clan members milling about down the hall. He felt uncomfortable when they hesitated upon seeing him and whispered to each other behind their hands before quickly continuing on their way. All of the Hyuga clan members could be identified through their dark long hair, pale featureless eyes, and their attire of traditional robes. With his bright blue eyes, spiky blonde hair, and his Konoha combat uniform, Naruto stuck out like a weed in a flower bed. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement coming from down the hallway. Turning to see if it was Hiyashi, he was instead greeted by the image of Hinata walking towards him. She didn't appear to have noticed him as she had 2 companions with her. On Hinata's left, was a slightly older woman with long black hair, and on the right was a younger girl with dark brown hair falling over her shoulders, whom Hinata was currently talking to. Hinata herself looked a bit different from her appearance at dinner a week ago. Her silky indigo hair was tied back into a loose bun that sat at the nape of her neck, and she wore a plain lavender kimono tied together with a simple purple obi. She had no makeup on, but that didn't take anything away from her natural beauty. "Hey Hinata." Naruto waved. Hinata stopped suddenly and looked over towards him, clearly surprised to see him there. "Big sister, who's that ninja and why is he addressing you so casually?" the young girl at Hinata's side asked with slight aggravation. Instead of answering her little sister's question, Hinata turned towards the woman at her other side and asked, "Lady Hotaru, would you mind taking Hanabi back to the dining room for lunch? I'll rejoin you both there in a few minutes." The woman smiled and nodded. "Of course, Lady Hinata. Come along, Lady Hanabi." Lady Hotaru then grabbed the young girl's hand to pull her in the direction they just came from. "Hey, big sister, you didn't answer my question." Hanabi protested as she was led away. When they were out of sight, Hinata turned her attention back towards Naruto and stepped forward towards him. "Hello, Naruto," she bowed slightly, "what brings you to our home today?" Naruto stood up and smiled towards her as he held up the scroll. "I'm here to deliver a message to your father from the Hokage's office. The thing is, I have to give it to him personally, so I'm waiting for him to get out of his meeting." "Oh, I see. I hope you haven't been waiting too long?" Naruto grinned and waved his hand dismissively. "Nah, it hasn't been too bad, just a few minutes." An awkward silence then fell between them as Hinata lowered her gaze to the floor and Naruto was at a loss as to what to say next. A thought then occurred to him. Hinata?" She looked up towards him. "Would you mind waiting here with me? I mean, until your father gets here." He anxiously rubbed the back of his neck, averting his gaze. "Only if you want to though, or if you have nothing else to do right now." Hinata was taken back once again by the Konoha Jonin's shyness and felt her own blush creeping onto her cheeks. Sure, I don't mind," she answered meekly. "Okay, great." The two then sat down next to each other on the ledge looking over the courtyard with the lingering awkwardness between them. Naruto's nerves made him clam up again as he searched his brain for something to talk about. "So that was your little sister earlier, huh?" he asked. Hinata nodded. "Yes, that was Hanabi, she's 5 years younger than me." She didn't know what else to add and the uncomfortable silence found its way back. "Do you have any siblings, Naruto?" She already knew the answer, but she was desperate to keep their conversation going. Naruto shook his head. "No, it's just me and my dad. Though there is a Chunin that lives in my barracks that has always been like a little brother to me, but I guess that's not the same," he trailed off. Hinata stared at the grass just beneath her feet, embarrassed at not knowing what else to say to the young man sitting next to her. Naruto glanced at her and saw her discomfort. Maybe asking her to wait with him wasn't as good of an idea as he thought, but she was here so he had to keep trying. I guess my village and your clan aren't exactly excited about coming together just yet, huh? He said, changing the topic. Hinata lifted her head back towards him and nodded. Yes, there are some concerns within our clan. I know there's unease over being sent off to aid in another war. I can't say I blame them, Naruto answered, but at least there's not much fighting now. Our enemies retreated a few months ago and we're still trying to figure out where they're hiding. A curious expression came over Hinata's face as she looked back over the courtyard. Something I find interesting is that around the time that the Akatsuki and the Uchiha clan retreated from the battlefields, Hanzo of the Salamander also disappeared from a megacure. None of the Kage or any of the other village leaders have seen or heard from him for several months now. It makes you wonder if there's a connection between the two events, doesn't it? She looked over back at Naruto with the same serious expression. Naruto sat there dumbstruck by the girl's clever observation. Not only did she seem to actually know about what was going on in the current war, but she also knew about the other villages as well and their inner workings. She was clearly not the sheltered, pampered princess that Naruto had initially assumed her to be. A look of embarrassment came over Hinata as she noticed the way Naruto was looking at her. I am sorry. That was out of line for me to say, she exclaimed as she turned her blushing face away in shame. To her horror, Naruto started laughing. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable just now, he said between chuckles, it's just, you keep surprising me, Hinata. She looked back over at him, huh? He looked towards her and grinned. When I first heard about you, I assumed that you would just be some spoiled, rich girl who knew nothing about the outside world. But you take care of your own garden, you don't dress up all the time, and you're smarter than most of the Jonin in my class. You're a pretty cool person, Hinata, ya know? Hinata's blush deepened as she looked away, not expecting Naruto to compliment her so directly. Thank you. And you're right about Hanzo, Naruto continued. My dad, I mean the Hokage, had the same suspicions as you and is investigating it as we speak. You've got the same line of thinking as the most powerful man in the Land of Fire. How do you know about all this kind of stuff anyway? Well, the Hyuga have always survived by being keenly aware of what's going on in the world around us, and as the heiress to the clan, it's my duty to understand important events such as the present war as well as who all of the world leaders are. My father has always had me study all of his intelligence briefings with him and has taught me most of what I know about world politics. What she didn't reveal to Naruto was that her father had stopped allowing her to read his intelligence briefings and had started educating her younger sister in her place. Instead, she added, besides, I find it all to be very interesting. I've never left the Hyuga compound, so reading up on the world is the closest I'll ever get to see any of it. Wow, you're a lot more studious than me. Naruto observed, I was a lousy student at the Ninja Academy. I also want to be Hokage someday, but I've never been disciplined enough to actually sit down with my dad and have him teach me some stuff that I should be learning about now, the Jonin admitted. Hinata looked over at him sympathetically. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself, Naruto. Becoming a Jonin and having to fight in a war is very difficult. No one should blame you for not wanting to burden yourself any further. Naruto chuckled at her sincerity. I guess you're right. Things became quiet once again, but Naruto was feeling much more comfortable around the Hyuga princess now. He then decided to address the subject that had been silently burdening both of them for the past week. Hinata, what do you think about this whole arranged marriage thing? Hinata was startled out of her thoughts by Naruto's unexpected question. She looked over at him and noticed the sincere expression on his face. Well, as the clan's heiress, I've always known that my marriage would be arranged, so it's nothing that I haven't expected. Yeah, but is this what you want? Hinata's eyes widened in surprise at his response before he continued. I mean, you've never even met me before last week, and he turned away in shame. I know that I have a certain reputation. Hell, people in my own village won't even look me in the eye most of the time. If I were you, I'd want nothing to do with me. Hinata observed Naruto as he gazed sadly towards the ground. She found herself feeling pity for the young man who clearly understood the fear and disdain many people had towards him. Feeling a moment of bravery, she asked, is it true, what they say? Naruto reacted by quietly lifting his head up but didn't look at her. He hesitated for a moment and then spoke. For as long as I can remember, People have always feared and hated me for containing something that brought so much death and destruction to our village. I fought my whole life to prove my worth to those around me and to earn their acceptance. That's actually why I want to be Hokage someday, because it would mean that everyone in the village would trust and respect me enough to be their leader and protector. So I trained hard to learn how to contain the demon's chakra inside of me and not let it control my actions. For a while, I succeeded. He turned towards her. But then, a year ago, I learned that my best friend was a traitor to the village that I had dedicated my life to protecting. I didn't want to believe it at first, and I actually thought that if I were strong enough, I could make him change his ways and stay in the village. He clenched the scroll in his hand. I was wrong though, my own strength wasn't enough. So in an act of desperation, I made a deal with the devil living inside me. I told him that he could use me to kill as many shinobi as he wanted, as long as he lent me his strength long enough to bring my best friend back to his senses, and I failed. My friend still ended up defecting from the village along with the rest of his clan, and now he's been branded as an enemy to Konoha. If I ever encounter him, it's my duty to kill him. And now, I'm stuck with a powerful demon living inside of me that I can no longer control in battle. It's gotten to the point where my own friends are afraid of me and my dad has put me onto a suspension where I'm restricted to missions that don't take me outside the village. I don't know exactly what you've heard, Hinata, but that's the truth of what I've become. He then looked away again, leaving the girl beside him to ponder the heavy burden he had just shared with her. After a few quiet moments, Hinata spoke up. You keep surprising me too, Naruto. Huh? Naruto looked up, taken aback by Hinata's small confession. Hinata continued, when my father first told me about the arrangement, I was scared. I didn't know anything about you other than the stories I was told about the Kyuubi inside of you. Last week when we first met, I didn't know what to expect. She then smiled warmly towards him. But so far, I don't think you're anything like those stories I've heard. I think you're actually an incredibly kind person, Naruto. Naruto stared incredulously at her. He had been called many things in life, but kind was not one of them. The hard gaze caused Hinata to blush and avert her eyes, a cute habit of hers that Naruto was quickly picking up on. I am sorry, Naruto. I shouldn't have spoken to you so informally. She was cut off by Naruto's chuckling and the young Hyuga princess turned back with a confused gaze towards her blonde companion. Hinata, you should only speak to me informally, he told her amusingly. I only know how to be candid with others. I'm not about hiding my true feelings behind stupid formalities and all this bureaucratic nonsense, and neither should you. Hinata let out a soft giggle. Oh okay, I'll try to remember that. Naruto smiled towards her and genuinely found himself enjoying her company. How about this? Hinata, let's be friends. No matter what ends up happening between your clan and my village, I'd like to know that at least I gained a good friend out of all this. Hinata smiled back, feeling much less tense than she had earlier. I would like that very much, Naruto. Oh, Lady Hinata, we were starting to wonder if you had forgotten about us. The woman who was accompanying Hinata earlier joked. Hinata smiled towards her as she knelt down at the dining table next to Hanabi. The woman sitting on the other side was Lady Hotaru, Hinata and Hanabi's lady-in-waiting. She had become their guardian when the girl's mother had died from a sudden illness. Hinata and Hanabi were only 7 and 2 years old respectively. Hotaru herself had been through a recent loss at the time. Her husband died in the war while aiding Konoha's forces. Hinata and Hotaru found comfort in each other during those early days and had formed a quick bond. Hotaru was old enough to provide a motherly presence for Hinata but young enough to give her the type of confidant that only an older sister could have. She was Hinata's closet female companion. I'm sorry for keeping you both, Hinata said. Father's meeting ran long so I didn't want to leave Naruto by himself. Hotaru smiled knowingly towards the Hyuga princess. She knew all the details of the proposed arranged marriage between her ward and the blonde Jinchuriki, including Hinata's disdain for the idea in the beginning and her current uncertainty about the young man after finally meeting him last week. It gave Hotaru hope that maybe Hinata would find happiness after all from this arrangement. Just who was that guy anyways, big sister? Hanabi demanded. Hanabi had a very different personality from her elder sister. She was confident, outspoken, and was prone to an explosive temper that often got her into trouble with her father and the clan's elders. Yet, she loved her elder sister deeply and would risk anything to protect her feelings. Which is why Hinata had chosen to not confide anything to Hanabi just yet about the proposed arrangement between herself and Naruto. Hinata smiled affectionately towards her little sister. He's a shinobi from the leaf that was here to deliver a message from the Hokage's office to father. I met him last week when he was here with the Hokage, so I decided to keep him company while he waited. Satisfied with her sister's answer, Hanabi shrugged and went back to eating her lunch while gabbing with Hotaru. It gave Hinata a moment to herself to take in what had just transpired between her and Naruto. After last week's dinner, Hinata barely slept that night because of her racing thoughts. Her first impression of Naruto was that he was nothing like the monster that stories had described him as. Instead, he was just a young man who was as uncomfortable and nervous as she was to be there that night. When they talked in the garden, Hinata found herself enjoying Naruto's lack of formalities and his open way of speaking to her. It was refreshing actually. It also made her situation more confusing as now she didn't know how she felt about potentially marrying Naruto in the near future. At least before their initial meeting, she knew how she felt and had a plan in place. She was taken aback when she saw him earlier today and was even more surprised by how eager he seemed to be for her to sit with him while he waited for Hiashi. However, she was glad everything happened the way it did. They finally had a chance to talk about their proposed marriage to each other, as uncomfortable as it was, and were at least able to get on the same page about being friends for now. Perhaps she was naive for being able to change her view of Naruto from being a dangerous beast to a good-natured young man after just 2 meetings with him, but she couldn't help but feel a compelling sense of peace whenever she thought of the blonde shinobi. Hinata smiled as she watched her little sister beside her animately telling a story to Hotaru. The Hyuga princess didn't know what the future held, but she did know that she was content with having made a new friend. Ah, well, if it isn't my favorite pupil. The tired Yondaime looked up from his mountain of paperwork and grinned when he realized who his visitor was. Master Jiraiya, it's been too long. Well, if my Hokage hadn't sent me on a dangerous spy mission all the way out in a megacure, I would have been back in Konoha much sooner. The older man jested. Minato sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. You make a fair point, sensei. Jiraiya chuckled and plopped down on a chair just in front of the Hokage's desk. It was worth it to send me out there though. I didn't find out everything, but I've come across some interesting intelligence. What is it? Minato asked more seriously. I wasn't able to gain access into a megacure, but from what I was able to observe, I'm certain that Hanzo is dead. The news troubled the Yondaime. I know that there's been growing civil unrest between Hanzo's faction and those who want him overthrown, but nothing in our intelligence has indicated that warfare has broken out in a megacure. You're right, Minato, but my intelligence suggests that Hanzo is no longer in power. There must have been a silent coup that occurred recently that eradicated Hanzo and all his supporters. The citizens seem to be happier with the new leader, whoever he is. Are there any details on this new leader? No, he's just as secluded and secretive as Hanzo was. I couldn't even get a name. I'll need to return there soon to find out more information. I'm certain that this is somehow linked to the Akatsuki. Minato nodded in agreement. Before you return, I'll need you here in the village for a bit. We have the Chunin exams coming up with Sanagakure and I can use your aid with the heightened security measures we'll have in place. And there's also Naruto. The Toad Sage perked up at hearing his godson's name. Naruto? Didn't you send him to the Takigakure border for 6 months? Minato sighed. I did, but I had to cut his assignment short. It happened again, didn't it? Jiraiya asked gravely. Several times. Sheesh, Jiraiya leaned back in his chair. This whole Uchiha debacle really messed the kid up. So you have him back here in the village, I take it? Minato nodded. I've prohibited him from leaving the village until we're able to get his control of the Kyuubi back to where it used to be. He's been under heavy observation and our analysis team has made multiple attempts to examine his mind, but it's been fruitless so far. I see. I'm concerned that Naruto's body won't last much longer at this rate, the Yondaime continued. What do you mean? Every time the Kyuubi takes over, it uses Naruto's body as a medium. By appearance, it looks as if Naruto's body is being protected by the Kyuubi's chakra, but in reality quite the opposite is happening. You mean his body takes damage every time the Kyuubi takes over? Minato nodded. Whenever Naruto comes out of the Kyuubi state, his body is covered in his own blood. He still heals and regenerates thanks to the Kyuubi's chakra, but the Hokage gazed regretfully down at his desk. The human body isn't meant to take on so much strain. If this keeps happening, Naruto will die. Jiraiya was chilled by Minato's blunt deduction. Unfortunately, the Toad Sage had no words of comfort to offer his former student. At this point, Naruto was the only one who could change the outcome. Not to mention he might be engaged soon, Minato added calmly. Jiraiya flew out of his chair. Engaged? To a woman? Well, yes. Explain. Minato then shared of his recent success in finally obtaining a long-awaited alliance with the Hyuga clan to bring them into Konoha, as well as his plans for Naruto's role in making the alliance a success. When he was done explaining, the Toad Sage seemed apprehensive. This would be a significant benefit for the village, especially since we lost the Sharingan with the Uchiha defection. But are you sure Naruto can handle such a big decision right now? I get that he's your son, but don't forget that I also trained him for 3 years straight and essentially raised him during the time he changed from a boy to a man. Even without the burdens he's facing right now, the kid still has an immaturity when it comes to marriage and relationships. Minato chuckled nervously. Perhaps you're right. I know I'm taking a big risk in having Naruto potentially marry the princess of one of the most prestigious clans in the Land of Fire, but I really do believe it's his best chance for happiness, and I think Hinata's love could be enough to help him retake his control over the Kyuubi. The Toad Sage crossed his arms and sighed. You've always been an idealist, Minato. Especially when it comes to your own son. Time will only tell if you're right or if you've doomed us all. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.